The hammer struck the nail with precision, driving it through the wooden beam and into the foundation post below. Ernst Weber wiped sweat from his forehead and examined his work with the critical eye of a craftsman who had built half the barns in Bavaria before the war turned carpenters into soldiers. The foundation was level, the posts were plumb, and the frame would be strong enough to support a roof that could withstand Texas weather for decades. It was good work, the kind that mattered. 3 miles away, Sheriff Tom Brennan was examining boot prints in the dry creek bed, following a trail that had led him deeper into the hill country than he had expected. The escaped German POW had been moving with purpose rather than panic, taking a deliberate route that suggested knowledge of the terrain. That was unusual. Most escape attempts were desperate, panic flights that ended quickly when reality confronted fantasy. This one was different. Ernst had escaped from Camp Fredericksburg 2 nights ago during a thunderstorm that had knocked out the camp's electrical fence for 40 minutes. He hadn't planned the escape. Opportunity had simply presented itself during the storm, and he had taken it without fully thinking through what would come next. But once outside the fence, running through darkness with lightning illuminating the Texas landscape, he had remembered something that had bothered him for months. The Schultz family, German immigrants who had settled in Texas 3 generations ago, maintaining their language and culture even as they became thoroughly American. Ernst had met Otto Schultz during a work detail repairing fences near the Schultz farm. Otto was 72, a widower who ran a small farming community with his extended family and several other German-American families who had clustered together for mutual support. They spoke German among themselves, which had made communication with Ernst possible during that fence repair work. Otto had mentioned a problem that weighed on him. The community's children, 17 of them ranging from 6 to 14 years old, had no school to attend. The nearest public school was 12 miles away over rough roads that became impassable during rain. The community had been saving money to build their own one-room schoolhouse, but labor was scarce with so many young men away at war. The foundation had been laid 2 years ago, but the actual building remained unbuilt. The children were learning what they could from parents and grandparents, but it wasn't enough. Ernst had listened to Otto's story and felt an unexpected kinship. Before the war, Ernst had been a master carpenter in a small Bavarian village. He had built homes, barns, churches, and a school that still served the community's children. He understood the importance of school, understood what it meant for children to have a proper place to learn. He had offered to help if circumstances ever permitted, a polite gesture that meant nothing given his status as a prisoner. But now, running through the storm with freedom suddenly thrust upon him, Ernst had thought about that unbuilt schoolhouse. He couldn't return to Germany. The war was clearly lost, and returning home meant returning to devastation and defeat. He couldn't stay free in America. Eventually someone would catch him, and then his situation would be worse than before. But perhaps, in the brief window between escape and recapture, he could do something meaningful. He could build a school. Sheriff Brennan had been tracking escaped prisoners for 3 years, ever since the POW camp had been established outside Fredericksburg. Most escapees were caught within hours, usually hiding in barns or wandering roads with no clear destination. This one was different. The tracks showed deliberate movement, suggesting purpose rather than panic. The direction bothered Brennan. The escapee was heading toward the Schultz settlement, a community he knew well despite their tendency to keep to themselves. The Schultz community had faced suspicion during the war years. German speakers living in Texas while America fought Germany created uncomfortable questions about loyalty and identity. Brennan had defended them repeatedly to state investigators and overzealous patriots who saw enemies in every German name. The Schultz families were American citizens, had sons serving in the U.S. military, paid their taxes, and caused no trouble. But suspicion lingered, and Brennan knew that an escaped German POW heading toward their settlement would reignite all those ugly questions. Ernst reached the Schultz farm at dawn after walking through the night. Otto was feeding chickens when Ernst emerged from the tree line, hands raised to show he meant no harm. The old farmer's eyes widened with recognition and concern. They spoke rapidly in German, Ernst explaining his situation and his intention, Otto protesting that helping an escaped POW would bring disaster on the community. "I'm going back," Ernst said firmly. "I know I'll be caught, but before that happens, I can build your school." Give me 3 days. I'll work from dawn to dark. You provide materials and help. I'll provide skill and labor. In 3 days, your children will have walls and a roof. After that, you can finish the interior yourselves. Then I'll turn myself into authorities." Otto Schultz stood silent for a long moment, weighing duty against need, risk against opportunity. His community had waited 2 years for someone capable of building their school. Now that person stood before him. A German POW who would certainly be captured soon, offering to do in 3 days what they hadn't accomplished in 2 years. The moral calculation was complicated, but the practical need was undeniable. 3 days, Otto finally said, "You work fast, you work quiet, and when the sheriff comes, and he will come, you surrender peacefully. No one in my community gets in trouble for helping you. That's the condition." Ernst nodded agreement. Within an hour, the community had mobilized. Men who should have been working their own fields gathered at the school site with tools and materials. Women brought food and water. The foundation post that stood empty for 2 years suddenly became the skeleton of a building as Ernst directed work with the confidence of a master craftsman. The design was simple, a rectangular structure 20 feet by 30 feet, with windows on 3 sides for light and ventilation, a pitched roof to shed rain, and a covered porch for entry. Ernst had built dozens of similar structures in Bavaria. His hands remembered the measurements, the angles, the sequences of construction, even if his mind struggled to translate Bavarian building traditions to Texas materials and conditions. By midday of the first day, the wall frames were rising. Ernst worked with intensity that impressed even the experienced farmers helping him. He measured once and cut accurately, wasted no material, and moved with efficiency that made complex carpentry look simple. Young Jacob Schultz, Otto's grandson who was 16 and eager to learn, watched Ernst work with fascination. "How do you know where everything goes?" Jacob asked, holding a board steady while Ernst nailed it in place. "You don't use plans or drawings." Ernst tapped his forehead. "The plan is here. I've built this school 20 times in my mind during 2 years in your camp. Every board, every nail, every angle. When you do something enough times in your head, your hands remember when the time comes." Sheriff Brennan reached the Schultz settlement on the afternoon of the second day. He had tracked the escapee methodically, following signs that became increasingly clear as his quarry stopped trying to hide his trail. The sound of hammering and sawing reached him before he saw the school site. He approached quietly, hand resting on his sidearm, expecting resistance or at minimum an attempt to flee. What he found instead stopped him in his tracks. 30 people, men, women, and children, were working on a building that hadn't existed 3 days ago. And in the center of it all, directing work and wielding a hammer with expert precision, was the escaped German POW, Ernst Weber, according to the camp records. Age 41, carpenter by trade, captured in North Africa after his unit surrendered. No history of violence, no disciplinary problems. Considered a model prisoner until his escape. Brennan watched from the tree line for 15 minutes, try to understand what he was witnessing. This wasn't a hostage situation. The community was cooperating voluntarily, even enthusiastically. This wasn't a hiding place. Ernst was working openly in full view of anyone who approached. This was construction, plain and simple, a community building something they needed with help from someone who knew how. Otto Schultz spotted the sheriff first and walked over to meet him, his weathered face showing resignation rather than fear. "Sheriff Brennan, we expected you yesterday." Brennan kept his hand on his pistol, but didn't draw it. "Otto, you're harboring an escaped prisoner of war. You understand that's a federal crime? I could arrest everyone here." Otto nodded slowly. "You could, and we knew that risk when we accepted his help. But look at what we're building, Sheriff. For 2 years our children have had no school. We couldn't finish it ourselves. Too much work, too few skilled hands. Then Ernst came and offered to help. In 2 days, he's done what we couldn't do in 2 years. 1 more day, and our children will have walls and a roof. After that, you can take him. He's not running. He just wanted to build a school first." The explanation was so unexpected that Brennan didn't immediately respond. He walked toward the construction site, his boots crunching on sawdust and with scraps. Ernst saw him coming, set down his hammer, and stood waiting. No attempt to flee, no plea for mercy, just quiet acceptance that the moment had arrived. "You're Ernst Weber," Brennan said, more statement than question. "Escaped from Camp Fredericksburg 2 nights ago. You know I have to take you back." Ernst nodded. "Yes, Sheriff. I know this. But please, give me until tomorrow evening. The roof, it must be finished before rain comes. Rain will damage everything if the building has no roof. One more day, then I go back. You have my word." Brennan looked at Ernst, then at the partially built schoolhouse, then at the community of people who had stopped working to watch this confrontation. He thought about duty, about rules, about the clear legal obligation to arrest an escaped POW immediately. But he also thought about 17 children who needed a school, about a community that had waited 2 years, and about a man who had escaped from captivity not to flee, but to build something. "I could lose my badge for this," Brennan said slowly, letting an escaped prisoner continue his escape. "Even for another day, that's dereliction of duty by any standard." Ernst met his eyes directly. "I understand, Sheriff. Do what you must. But I tell you truly, I am not running away. I am running toward something. There is difference, yes? Running away is about fear. Running toward is about purpose. I found purpose here. I will finish it, then face consequences." The sheriff made a decision that surprised even himself. "I'm going to sit here and make sure you don't escape again. That's the story I'll tell my superiors, that I apprehended you at this location and maintained custody while you finish a construction project that you had coerced the community into supporting. That's the official version. Understood?" Relief flooded Otto's weathered face. Ernst simply nodded and picked up his hammer, returning to work as if the interruption had never occurred. Brennan found a shaded spot under a tree and sat down, watching a German prisoner war-build an American schoolhouse, while a sheriff who should have arrested him immediately instead chose to let duty bend in the face of something larger than rules. The work continued through the afternoon with renewed urgency now that the sheriff was present. Ernst pushed the pace, knowing that Brennan's tolerance had limits and that every minute counted. The wall frames went up, cross bracing was installed, and the roof trusses were assembled on the ground before being lifted into place. The community worked with coordinated efficiency, understanding that they were racing against both weather and official patience. Jacob Schultz worked directly alongside Ernst, learning carpentry techniques that had been passed down through generations of German craftsmen. Ernst explained each step in German-accented English that improved as the day progressed, teaching not just how to build, but why each choice mattered. "The roof pitch must be steep for Texas rain," Ernst explained while cutting rafters. "Too shallow and water pools. Weight damages structure. Too steep and wind catches it like a sail. This angle, 35 degrees, is correct balance." Sheriff Brennan watched the instruction with interest despite himself. He had grown up in Texas, knew basic construction, but Ernst's expertise was evident in every decision. This wasn't amateur work or makeshift building. This was professional craftsmanship adapted to local conditions and available materials. The school would stand for decades if properly maintained. By evening of the second day, the walls were complete and the roof frame was in place. Only the roofing material remained to be installed, corrugated metal sheets that would be nailed down the following day. Ernst examined the structure critically in the fading light, checking alignment and strength, satisfied that the work was sound. The children who had been watching from a distance throughout the day now approached shyly, seeing their future school take physical form. "Will it be ready for us?" asked a young girl named Emma, maybe 8 years old, speaking the German dialect common to the community. "Will we really have a school?" Ernst knelt to her level, his weathered face softening. "Yes, little one. Tomorrow the roof goes on, windows are installed, doors hung. It will be ready. You will learn here, grow here, become whatever you choose to become. That is what schools are for." Brennan had learned some German during his years in Fredericksburg, enough to understand the exchange. He saw how the children looked at Ernst, not as an enemy or a prisoner, but as a man building their school. War created categories and divisions, turned people into allies or enemies based on which government they served. But here in this moment, Those categories seemed less important than the simple fact that children needed a school and a carpenter was building one. That night, Brennan and Ernst sat by a small fire while the Schultz family provided dinner for everyone who had worked on the school. The sheriff had been offered a bed in the main house, but chose to stay outside, maintaining his official story that he was guarding the prisoner. Ernst accepted the arrangement without complaint, understanding the fiction that allowed everyone to save face. "Why did you escape?" Brennan asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Camp Fredericksburg is decent, as POW camps go. Good food, fair treatment, work details that aren't too hard. Most prisoners just wait out the war. Why risk everything to run?" Ernst stared into the fire, choosing his words carefully. "I was not running from camp, Sheriff. I was running from uselessness. In Germany, I built things, homes, barns, churches, schools. Things that mattered, that served people, that would outlast me. In camp, I repair fences that don't need repair, move dirt from one place to another place for no reason. It is work to keep us busy, not work that matters. When Otto told me about the school, I saw a chance to do something that matters again, even for just 3 days." Brennan understood that reasoning better than he wanted to admit. He had spent 3 years processing paperwork for escaped prisoners, most of whom were caught within hours, having accomplished nothing except causing trouble. Ernst had escaped and built a school. The contrast was stark. "What happens after I take you back?" Brennan asked. "You know they'll probably transfer you to a higher security camp. Maybe add time to your internment." Ernst shrugged. "I knew that when I left. But the school will still be here. The children will still learn in it. That is worth whatever punishment comes. In war, most of what we do disappears. Battles fought over ground that changes hands. Buildings destroyed, lives wasted. But a school remains. Children who learn in that school will remember it their whole lives. That is something that lasts." The third day dawned clear and hot, typical Texas summer weather. Ernst was working before full sunrise, determined to complete the roof before the afternoon heat became unbearable. The corrugated metal roofing went up quickly with multiple people working together. Each sheet overlapped and nailed according to Ernst's precise specifications. By noon, the roof was complete and watertight, sealed against rain that could come at any moment in Texas Hill Country. The windows came next. Simple frames with real glass that Otto had purchased years ago in anticipation of finishing the school. Ernst installed them with careful attention to fit and seal, ensuring they would open for ventilation but close tight against weather. The door was hung on heavy hinges, swinging smoothly and latching securely. By mid-afternoon, the structure was complete, a proper one-room schoolhouse that would serve the community's children. Ernst stood back to examine the finished building, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction. It wasn't the finest school he had ever built. Materials had been limited and time had been short, but it was sound, functional, and would serve its purpose for decades. The children already were exploring inside, their voices echoing in the empty space that would soon be filled with desks, books, and the sounds of learning. Otto Schultz approached Ernst with tears in his weathered eyes. "You have given our children a gift beyond measure. How can we thank you?" Ernst shook his head. "No thanks needed. I am carpenter. Carpenters build things. This is what I am supposed to do. I am grateful you let me remember who I am, even for 3 days." Sheriff Brennan had been watching the final touches being applied to the school, his official report forming in his mind. He would have to explain why he hadn't arrested the escaped prisoner immediately, why he had allowed work to continue for a full day after locating the escapee. The truth, that he had witnessed something more important than following rules, wouldn't satisfy his superiors. But Brennan found he didn't care much about official disapproval. Some things mattered more than procedure. "Ernst Weber," Brennan said formally, approaching with handcuffs visible but not yet applied. "It's time. You built your school. Now you face the consequences." Ernst nodded, wiping his hands on his work pants one last time. "I am ready, Sheriff. Thank you for letting me finish." The handcuffs clicked shut around Ernst's wrists with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet afternoon. The community had gathered to witness his departure, their faces showing gratitude mixed with sorrow. Children who had played around a construction site for 3 days now stood solemnly, understanding that the man who built their school was being taken away. The drive back to Fredericksburg took 90 minutes over rough roads. Brennan drove slowly, in no particular hurry, to complete a duty that felt increasingly wrong despite being legally correct. Ernst sat in the back seat, watching the Texas landscape pass by, memorizing details he might not see again for years. "What will you tell them?" Ernst asked quietly. "Your superiors at the camp?" Brennan had been thinking about exactly that question for the past day. "The truth, mostly, that I tracked you to the Schultz settlement, found you engaged in construction work, and determined that allowing the work to be completed before arrest served community relations better than immediate apprehension, that the Schultz community was cooperative and that no force was necessary, that you surrendered peacefully as agreed. And the part about watching me work for a full day while I finished the school? That part gets explained as ensuring the safety of the community while maintaining custody of an escaped prisoner who had become embedded in a civilian work project." Brennan replied. "Bureaucratic language that means nothing and everything. The key point is that you're being returned to custody. Nobody was hurt, and no actual harm was done." They arrived at Camp Fredericksburg as the sun was setting. The camp commander, Colonel Richard Patterson, was waiting at the main gate with an expression that mixed anger with confusion. He had expected the escaped prisoner to be returned days earlier and had been preparing reports explaining the failure to recapture him promptly. Now Brennan was arriving with the prisoner in custody and an explanation that would need to be carefully crafted. "Sheriff Brennan," Patterson said formally as Ernst was transferred to camp guards, "I'll need a full report on the circumstances of this apprehension and why it took 3 days to return the prisoner to custody." Brennan provided a concise summary that emphasized security concerns and community relations while downplaying the fact that he had essentially allowed Ernst to complete his project before arrest. Patterson listened with increasing skepticism, clearly aware that the official story omitted details that might be problematic. "Sheriff, I appreciate your efforts to maintain good relations with the local German-American community," Patterson said carefully, "but allowing an escaped prisoner to remain at large for 3 days while he engaged in construction work is irregular at best. I'll need to report this to higher authority." "I understand, Colonel. I'll provide a full written report. But I'll tell you plainly, that man built a school for children who had no school. He worked harder in 3 days than most men work in 3 weeks. He surrendered peacefully as promised. And the community that was harboring him is now firmly supportive of American authority because we treated them fairly. That's worth something operationally." Patterson couldn't argue with the community relations benefit. But military regulations weren't built on pragmatic flexibility. Weber will face disciplinary action for the escape, probably solitary confinement, and possible transfer to a higher security facility. That's standard procedure. Ernst was processed back into camp, fingerprinted, photographed, and placed in a holding cell pending disciplinary review. He accepted the process with calm resignation, understanding that consequences had always been inevitable. The 3 days of freedom and purpose had been worth whatever punishment followed. News of the escape and subsequent events spread quickly through both the camp and the town. Among the German POWs, Ernst became something of a folk hero, the man who escaped not to flee, but to build a school. Among the townspeople, reactions were mixed. Some viewed his actions as admirable, others as a security breach that should be punished severely. The Schultz community stayed quiet, not wanting to draw additional attention to their role in events. The disciplinary hearing was held 3 days later. Ernst stood before a panel of 3 officers who reviewed his case with military formality. The charges were clear: unauthorized absence from the camp, failure to return as required, and engaging with civilians while escaped. The evidence was undeniable. The only question was the appropriate punishment. Colonel Patterson chaired the panel and conducted the questioning. "Prisoner Weber, do you dispute the charges against you?" "No, sir," Ernst replied in his accented English. "I left camp without authorization. I did not return as required. I engaged with civilians. All of this is true. Why did you escape? What was your objective?" Ernst considered how to explain purpose to men who dealt in rules and regulations. "Sir, there was school that needed building. Children with no place to learn. I am carpenter. I know how to build schools. I saw opportunity to do something useful, something that matters. So I built school. Then I surrendered as I promised Sheriff Brennan I would do. One of the other officers spoke up. You could have requested permission to help with the construction through proper channels. Work details are regularly assigned to community projects. Yes, sir, but this would take weeks to approve, maybe months. School needed to be built before next rain. Children needed to start learning. Sometimes proper channels take too long for what needs doing. The panel deliberated for 30 minutes before announcing their decision. Ernst received 30 days in solitary confinement for the escape and unauthorized absence. However, given his clean record, his peaceful surrender, and the nature of his activities while escaped, he would not be transferred to a higher security facility. After serving his punishment, he would return to regular camp population. The sentence was lenient by military standards, reflecting an unspoken acknowledgement that Ernst's offense, while serious, had been motivated by constructive purpose rather than malicious intent. He accepted the punishment without complaint and was led away to begin his 30 days of isolation. Sheriff Brennan visited the Schultz School 2 weeks later, ostensibly to check on community relations, but really to see the finished product. The interior had been completed by community members following Ernst's instructions. Desks had been built and installed, a blackboard hung on the front wall, and books donated by various sources filled a small shelf. 17 children sat in those desks, learning reading, arithmetic, and geography from a retired teacher who had volunteered to instruct them. Otto Schultz showed Brennan around with obvious pride. The children started classes last week. Already they're learning so much. Ernst School, it is exactly what we needed. How's it holding up? Brennan asked, examining construction with an expert eye. Perfectly. We had 3 days of heavy rain last week. Not a single leak. The structure is sound. Ernst knew what he was doing. Otto paused, then continued quietly. Sheriff, what we did, harboring an escaped prisoner, we know it was wrong legally, but it felt right morally. Does that make sense? Brennan nodded slowly. It makes sense. Sometimes the law and what's right don't align perfectly. You have to choose which one matters more in that specific moment. I chose to let Ernst finish the school. You chose to help him build it. Were we wrong legally? Probably. Were we wrong morally? I don't think so. Ernst served his 30 days in solitary confinement and returned to regular camp population to find that his status among fellow prisoners had changed dramatically. He was no longer just another POW waiting out the war. He was a man who escaped to build a school, who used his freedom for construction rather than flight, who turned 3 days of liberty into something permanent. When the war ended in May 1945, Ernst was among the prisoners who chose to remain in America rather than return to a devastated Germany. The immigration process was complex, but Otto Schultz sponsored his application, testifying that Ernst was a skilled craftsman who would contribute to the community. Sheriff Brennan added his own letter of support, carefully worded to acknowledge Ernst's escape while emphasizing his character and his contribution to the community. Ernst Weber became an American citizen in 1948 and established a carpentry business in Fredericksburg. Over the next 30 years, he built dozens of structures throughout the Texas Hill Country, homes, barns, churches, and 3 more schools. But the one-room schoolhouse in the Schultz community remained his favorite, the building that represented 3 days when he had been fully himself despite being a prisoner, when he found purpose in the midst of captivity. The school served the community until 1967, when consolidation moved students to a larger facility in town. The building was preserved as a community center, with a plaque installed explaining its unusual history. The plaque mentioned Ernst Weber, master carpenter and former German POW, who built the school during 3 days of escape in August 1944. It didn't mention that he had been pursued by a sheriff who found him working and chose to let duty wait until the school was finished. Sheriff Tom Brennan retired in 1958, having served Gillespie County for 23 years. At his retirement ceremony, Ernst was among those who spoke, thanking the sheriff for understanding that some things matter more than rules, that purpose can be found in unexpected places, and that humanity sometimes requires bending regulations in service of larger truths. You could have arrested me immediately, Ernst said during his brief speech. You would have been correct to do so. but you saw that children needed a school more than the camp needed one prisoner returned 3 days earlier. You made the right choice, even though it was not the easy choice. That is what good law enforcement looks like, knowing when rules serve justice, and when justice requires something more than rules. The story of the escaped German POW, who built a school instead of running, became a local legend in Fredericksburg, told and retold with variations over the decades. Some versions emphasized Ernst's skill and dedication. Others focus on Brennan's unusual decision to allow the work to continue. All versions agreed on the essential truth, that 3 days of escape had produced something lasting, that purpose had triumphed over protocol, and that sometimes the best way to serve your duty is to recognize when something matters more than following orders. History isn't always about following rules. Sometimes it's about knowing when to break them for something that matters more. Ernst Weber escaped from captivity not to flee but to build, and Sheriff Tom Brennan understood that some things are worth bending duty for. If stories about choosing purpose over protocol resonate with you, subscribe to our channel for more moments when people decided that doing the right thing mattered more than doing the required thing. Sometimes the best stories are about people who saw beyond categories of enemy and allied to recognize simple human needs and the courage to address them.